This is not a Steve Jobs product.
Yeah.
Okay, how's that?
It'll come.
Okay.
We'll just wait. No big deal.
Okay.
No big deal.
No viewers, so we're good so far.
Is that a good thing?
Okay, so we are good.
Yeah.
Hello. We're good? They can hear me?
Everybody can hear you.
Everybody can hear me. Okay, so we are gonna go through, let's see, module 3 and module 4. So we've done modules 1 and 2, and as we're heading into modules 3, we're starting to look, calling this one horizon scanning, which, as you know by now, is looking at the industry. What's the landscape? Who are the competitors? How concentrated is our competition? So we'll do that, look at those questions. We'll also do module 4. Module 4 was disruption. And to remind you, we were looking at low-end market theory, which is where you've got an incumbent, someone who's ruling the roost, who's really dominant. And then you've got this smaller player who finds a way to eat away slowly at first at this incumbent's place until eventually they usurp that role. We also have new market distribution, which some of you had questions on. So why don't we start from the top? We do our discussion forums. Okay, first of all, they're vigorous, they are active, and thank you for both of those. We picked out a few that we thought would be common to everybody. So hopefully by answering these, the rest of you will also take cues on some of the answers, especially on the assignments that you are having. So our first one is Porter's 5 forces. And this came in from, bear with me, Carla Danielle Penarosa. If I got any of those right, Carla, I think I get a point. Carla Danielle Penarosa 1. She asks, I wonder if the analysis for the 5 force model is more of a subjective one, as I saw different answers in the submitted work from myself and my peers, with equally valid points and ways of looking at the market from different optics. Could you elaborate? So first off, Carla, you're right. It's absolutely subjective. And within the confines of this course, it'll stay largely subjective. The way you make it more objective or fact-based is when you move into secondary research. So products like IBISWorld, products like WARC, products like Nielsen, all of these huge industry products for research, they help you to ground whatever it is your opinion is in objective research. Within this course, we don't expect you to do that. Within this course, we just want you to make reasonable assumptions that our marker can connect. So just leave us a breadcrumb trail and we'll give you marks. So that being said, it is subjective. What I think it really depends on is how you frame the industry. So if you frame the industry broadly, there's going to be a lot different factors. And I'm going to talk about an example in a sec so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. And the second one is, in Porter's 5 forces, it's always going to be a band. You're always going to use low to medium, medium to high, when you're describing the strength of one of these forces. It's never going to be just an absolute low or an absolute high, or it'll be the rare case because you have so many different factors that combine. So to recap, yes, it's subjective. It's going to depend on how you frame the industry. And you're going to have these inexact bands of the strength of each power, each force. So let's look at an example to show you how that works in a concrete way. The one I had scribbled down before I sat down was luxury cars. So luxury cars for 5 forces. If we define the industry as luxury cars generally, so everything from a Mercedes to a BMW to an Audi, we get very different results in our 5 forces than if we define the industry as supercars, for instance, a very small slice of luxury cars. So let's play that out. If we see supplier power And we've defined the industry as this broad luxury car segment with BMW and Audi and so on. Supplier power is actually lower. Ooh, someone liked my answer. Supplier power is actually lower. It means when we look at the number of supplier, there's more who are producing what is not a unique part. We can go, if we're BMW, to supplier 1, and then if we don't like their product, we can go to supplier 2, we can go to supplier 3. So supplier power might be low to medium. Have a wide definition of the industry. However, if we go to a different framing of the industry and we say it's just those supercars. So let's say we're talking about a Lexus, an LFA. They only made 500 of these. In the same category might be a Lamborghini. So if we have a Lexus LFA and a Lamborghini in the narrow slice, if we look at suppliers now, it is the rare supplier who can make a custom 10-cylinder engine that the LFA requires. It is the rare supplier that can make the special custom after finish with walnut that goes into the LFA. So the supplier power is actually really high because the number of suppliers is low and what they make is unique. So that's a really good example of how it can be subjective, because when we framed our whole industry as large, as just luxury cars, supplier power was low because there were a larger number and it was less unique for what we could get. In terms of when we framed it narrowly as supercars, supplier power got amped. It was a lot higher because it was only a few suppliers who could make our type of engine and only a few suppliers who could make our type of finish. So that's the first thing, framing. The second thing is bands. So in either of those examples, yeah, it's way more powerful in terms of supplier power when you have a narrow segment like supercars. But I can say it's medium to high because it'll depend on which part, which component you're looking at. Alternatively, when we're in the really big industry definition, it's low to medium because, again, some parts are going to require a lot more unique suppliers. When you combine those two things, the fact that you can change the definitions of the edges of your industry along with that you can go in bands from low to medium, medium to high, you get a lot of subjectivity. And for our purposes in the course, as long as you're rational and show us your reasoning, we are very happy with your outcome. And in real life, so long as you pick your true industry competitors when you're framing the industry, so let's say you're in shoe sales and you pick, for you, retailers who sell shoes within a 4-block radius. If that's your industry, then yeah, it's subjective, but as long as you pick the right industry, you're doing something reflective and you're doing something that's valuable. So for the purposes of the course, just make sure that you choose something that makes sense. So either you're choosing, if you're doing cartems, you're doing high-end donuts, or maybe you're doing high-end snack food, or maybe you're doing experience eating where people look to food for a shared experience, a social experience. Any of those things would be a fine industry, which would come out with slightly different answers. And that's why you're seeing the spread against your peers. If we're moving on with more about Porter's 5 forces, this comes from Mantian Liu, who says, I still don't know how to exactly analyze the forces from these 5 aspects. Because from my homework about analyzing Jordan Cash's donut stores, I think I have some inaccurate conclusions. So I think it might be useful at this point to do a really quick recap of what the 5 forces are. And I'll do them against another example. So we used luxury handbags for those of you that have just watched the videos. Why don't we do it for one more so you can see how it works in a slightly different context. For example, we can go with luxury cars generally. So buyer power. You want to look at the number of buyers, how much each one orders. So maybe your whole business in the industry relies on one buyer. And then you want to look at things like how flexible are they or inflexible are they, and responsive to price change are they? So if we're doing luxury cars, you probably want to say in terms of the number of buyers, there's fewer than for mid-market or low market. In terms of how concentrated they are, they tend to be quite diffuse. There's a lot of buyers and there's turnover every year. And in terms of how price sensitive they are, you're probably seeing medium sensitivity, where these buyers, they're not going to be as affected by a recession as people buying medium to low income type cars. So when you combine all those factors, and it's in an exact science, you're probably going to see what? Medium strength of buyers. They do have some latitude as to who they want to buy from. They can go between car companies, but there's a lot of them and they tend to be diffuse. So they can't marshal that much power or influence over these suppliers of cars. When you go to suppliers of components, it's the same sorts of questions. It's the number of suppliers, how concentrated they are, how easy it is to switch your supply of parts from someone else. So for Cartems, you're looking at, well, what kind of ingredients do they get? Are these unique? And can they go get it from someone else? Luxury cars, there are starting to be more and more high quality alternatives from more and more geographically diverse locations. So there's some medium supplier power. They're starting to be able to switch over suppliers, and the suppliers themselves, if they get a cancellation from Mercedes, if they get a cancellation from BMW, that's a huge component of their business. So they don't hold that much weight in the industry. Substitutes is the next one. How easy is it for someone to go ahead and find a substitute for your product? And the way you want to think about this one is, what job are they hiring your product for? And can they find something else to do it? So for donuts, substitutes might be things like, and this is a high-end donut, they might look for a chocolate croissant. They might look for some sort of chocolate truffle. So really decadent, luxurious desserts. Those could be substitutes, as well as obviously high-end donuts. How easily can they get those? You'll have to look at things for Cartems like, well, who else is selling that in Vancouver? How close are they? How far are people willing to go for a sweet snack? All of those things are going to factor in for you. For luxury cars, with substitutes, it becomes an issue of what job are they hiring their Audi to do? What job are they hiring their BMW to do? And a lot of it has to do with status. A lot of it has to do with identity. A lot of it is brand loyalty. So with luxury cars, there actually aren't that many substitutes if your consumer is tying their identity or tying their social status to this particular brand. So that one would probably be the threat of substitutes, medium, depending on how brand loyal your customer is. So in barriers to entry, this is things like, including for Cartems, how much money do you have to spend to get into the industry? So in Cartems, you're looking at things like what machinery do they have to buy? We saw in the video that he has extremely expensive equipment. So he has these big dough sheeters. We also saw that he invested a lot into donut R&D, believe it or not, getting his recipes exactly right. So all of those are barriers to entry. So things like physical capital that they have to buy, or it's also things like if they've built up their brand. And is that brand name and that brand awareness something that an entrant would have difficulty building? So with luxury cars, there's actually pretty high barriers to entry. There's economies of scale. The bigger you are, the easier it is to produce these things. And also these are huge companies with so much brand awareness built up over decades. They also build brand awareness through race cars. A lot of them have extremely high performance vehicles on the F1 circuit and so on, showcasing the technology in their car. It is very difficult to walk off the street and go buy an F1 car or put one together. It's a huge barrier to entry. And the big guys in the industry, BMW, Ferrari, you name it, they've been in racing for decades. And that's a huge barrier to entry. So they're really high. And then the last step, if you combine all of those in a reasonable way, so if you're seeing a mixture of mediums and highs, then it's a really competitive industry. If you're seeing a mixture of lows to mediums, it's not really that competitive. So I would say, if you can loosely follow what I did with Car10s. So you're looking at, for buyers and suppliers, the number, how concentrated they are, how much influence they're able to exert. You're looking at barriers to entry, things like physical expenditures, things like brand name. You're looking at substitutes by looking at the job that you're hiring this product to do and what other products can do in terms of that same job. And then you're giving us reasonable points on each, and you're able to combine them, looking at a trend in whether there's more lows, more mediums, or more highs, you're good. So long story short, maybe think about going back over the videos and looking at each of the forces in a bit more detail to make sure you get the hallmarks, what to look for in each force. And then really thinking through what I've just talked about for each of those forces. Done a great job. And whether you have inaccurate conclusions, to go back to the first question's point, it's largely subjective. So if you've been reasonable in connecting the dots for us, you'll get marks in the course. And if in real life you've made reasonable assumptions, I'd say in real life, go ahead and try and back that up with research. But then they wouldn't be inaccurate conclusions at that point. They'd be reasonable, justifiable conclusions. So I'll leave it with that to chew on.
We have a question/comment.
Yeah.
A pair of them. So the
voice you're speaking, or the voice you're hearing, the disembodied voice, is Jamie, and he is going to be helping with live points from your discussion. So in addition to my slightly sick dulcet tones, you'll hear Jamie off screen every now and then. Has dulcet tones, I'm sorry, very dulcet. Soothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had a comment from a user named Horse-Wearing People Costume.
Oh, hello, horse-wearing people costume.
And he said,
I can't wait to read your assignment.
Calling something the free market does not make it so, and that is our problem. We let it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there any more context?
That was the context. It was a little bit ago, but I didn't want to interrupt your role.
No, not at all. Did I say the free market? Was this in response to what I was saying out loud?
This was in response to the 5 forces, I believe.
Okay. So calling something the free market does not make it so. Absolutely. There's a lot of friction in our market. There's government regulations, there's taxes, there's import and export duties, there's anti-competition, there's so many different things that keep our markets from operating in a frictionless way. 5 forces, though, is more about figuring out what the forces are within an industry with those features already in place and figuring out the dynamics of an industry, period. And I absolutely agree. There's no such thing as a frictionless market in existence right now. So 5 forces is more about, okay, in the industries that you have, what are the key drivers? And can we look to combine all those drivers to get an overall idea of how appealing an industry is? And I'm sorry if I called something a free market. I don't think there is one.
He'll get back to us. He's going to provide some context. I think he's typing it right now.
Oh, okay. While you're typing, why don't we look at, I think we're moving into pest, judging from this question. This was J. Godwin, 1698, for energy. So pest, just to remind you more generally, is when you look at political, economic, social, technological items to see what are these external macro forces that are gonna have impacts on your industry? And with PEST, you use it as a diagnostic tool at the beginning to try and figure out, well, when we're responding with our BMC with things like maybe how we connect with our customers, are there certain trends? For instance, CARTEMS, it's going to be health trends that we should be aware of. So this was posted by Jay Godwin, 1698, saying, I believe energy sources have experienced the most change, as now we are investing a lot into newer ways of energy production, such as renewable energy sources like solar and wind. Climate change, governments are adjusting regulations, such as, and they bring in a carbon cap. And in economic aspects, new energy sources has meant that energy can come to us cheaper, if not profitable, so I guess if not more profitable, especially in solar panels. I absolutely agree. So in social aspects, society is changing, and people are able to say, I have solar panels, being a little bit more able to project status, and technology has advanced this industry far beyond what it used to be. Fusion reactors, solar tiles, Tesla power walls, and more. It's aided the need for a more sustainable future. Jay Godwin, 1698, I agree. I think in terms of PEST and the T with technology, energy, and how we consume it, and the infrastructure and which energy sources make up the most of what we consume, we're seeing a fundamental shift. In BC, for instance, where we're located filming right now, we've already had to start taking that into account. So the government, when we're planning such things as our huge hydro dams, look at things like, well, hey, when we see electric cars, when we see Tesla, when we see things like power walls, what is that going to look like in terms of demand? They've actually had to crystallize it into a number and try and figure out what that should mean in terms of policy right now for building infrastructure. So I think you've hit on something really insightful, Jay. I think how we consume energy is a huge technological issue that's going to define our times. I think other ones are artificial intelligence. I mean, if you look at even where we are now versus 5 years ago, the leaps and bounds that we're making in building machines that can think, that's going to change the world. I would invite you to read a little bit about what, Bill Gates has a lot to say on the subject, Elon Musk has a lot to say on the subject, about where that might take us and what that might do in terms of the future of our job landscape. So in terms of what AI might do with jobs that are more automated or are more predictable, and it might eliminate those jobs and it might change the face of industry. AI was one, so energy was one, 3D printing was another big one that McKinsey thinks is gonna be huge. They just printed 3D skin out of a printer. So in terms of technology, being able to produce things at a very cheap rate is changing the game. The Internet of Things is another big one. We're all networked now. You have fridges that can tell you when to order more milk. It senses when it's low on things. So I think you've absolutely hit on a big one, and technology has so many aspects that are changing so quickly at a pace never before really seen, that PEST, no matter what industry you're in now, the T is something you always have to be cognizant of. So really nice insights there. Do we have more from our friend?
We do.
I can wait on that or go on to, we have one about transient advantage.
He says he thinks you do a great job. You're not dishonest and therefore understandable and explainable without losing common sense.
I don't know if I'm always full of common sense, but I'll try my hardest.
She actually gave the right answer. Free market, question mark. There is none, exactly. No context needed.
Oh, okay. But if you did want to have a further conversation, always open to. I'll get Darrell, our, sorry, just for your information, we have a dedicated TA to discussion boards. Well, we always look at them. So if you want to continue a conversation, you can always flag it. You can always make sure that you alert it as something, hey, this is still going, this is still vibrant, and we'll take looks at it and make sure that we participate in your conversation. Thank you. That was a really insightful comment. Let's look at transient advantage. So we're moving into module 4. Module 4 was all about disruption. It was all about Rita McGrath, who said there was a cycle to businesses. And for those of you in business, this is nothing new. All she's done is put a framework on top of what you live and breathe every day. There's ramping up as you slowly begin to bring your product to market if you're the one inventing it. And then you hit commercialization. And then after a while, after you've exploited all the opportunities, you start to have a market that drops away. So she had this transient advantage, this whole idea that you can never have, as what Porter once said, this sustainable competitive advantage, these advantages that last forever, these indefinite whales of advantages. And this question takes us right into the middle of those paradigms. This is Mantian, who has a really, really neat look at this. This is Mantian Liu, who said, I'm still confused about how managers know their products are in which period. The player, so the executive or whoever it is that's guiding this company, can't see most of the game. I absolutely agree. I think if you are in the middle of a cycle, it is very difficult to know where you are. There are cues and clues. So revenue, it's a big one. If you look on year-over-year growth or year-over-year trends, once you're in that exploitation phase, it's pretty steady. But if and when you start to see that drop off, and if it's sustained, then you know that your product may be in the start of its decline. So revenue year over year is a good one. But I think even more indicative is when you look at growth of competing industries or competing products or services. For instance, I think we looked at Gillette and Dollar Shave Club, which we'll get to a bit later in question period, I think, too. But Gillette, when they were, and they are in their exploitation phase, for some fairly technologically advanced razors, I mean, they had, what, 5 blades, one on the back, and it was vibrating, and you had a roller ball and a moisturizing strip and all sorts of things. In that exploitation phase where they're making money off their product, they start to see Dollar Shave Club come into the scene. And they start to see enormous growth year over year. We're talking double-digit, sometimes triple-digit growth. They are aware, and they're also comparing it to their own growth numbers. So there was a couple things. The first one is your own revenue in absolute terms. The second thing is when you compare your growth numbers to competitors. And if those competitors are seeing hyper growth, you're probably due for disruption. You're probably near the end of your cycle. And Gillette recognized this. They came up with their own subscription service to compete with Dollar Shave Club. I think that should give you enough to go on, Mantian. If not, let us know if you're in the session right now. But if this is you and your own business in the real world, I would say do a couple things. Take a really honest and robust survey of the other competitors out there and their offerings and see what the consumer response is. If you see a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz over a newer player or newer innovation or new pricing in the market, that's when you want to really dig into, well, how much money are they making? And how much growth are they achieving? And what are my numbers? And if you see a really huge disparity, that might be signs that you're starting to tail off. So this is also about transient advantage, but more so now moving into Porter and moving into low-end disruption. Clayton Christensen's low-end disruption. My mistake. Sorry. This is Ano Lob. posted about 22 days ago. So just to remind you, low-end disruption was where you had an incumbent, and the example that Ano gives is Gillette. So Gillette has targeted some fairly higher end or more sophisticated consumers. So a niche that would care about things like the number of blades, whether or not you could put a battery in and get it to vibrate, whether or not there's a 360 ball on it, all of those things they care about. Gillette starts to now focus on to the exclusion of other segments. And as they're focusing on this top segment, they innovate and come up with ever more bells and whistles for this product. And in the meantime, all of this lower end space, these ignored market segments, they're ready for exploitation. And the player that comes in low and takes out all of this space is our low end market disruption. So our question from Ano is, can you comment on the role that segmentation and targeting plays on low end disruption? Specifically, Dollar Shave Club's customers don't seem to be the same customers interested in Gillette's 3D ball shaver McThingy. I agree. They should have named it the 3D ball shaver McThingy. Has a ring to it. Gillette seems interested in a shaver who will pay a premium for features that the Dollar Shave Club customers don't. If they are targeting different segments of the market, is Dollar Shave Club disrupting Gillette or merely addressing the unmet needs of an unserved market? No, I'm going to take that last sentence because I think you might have answered your own question. You said, if they are targeting different segments of the market, is Dollar Shave Club disrupting Gillette or merely addressing the unmet needs of an underserved market? So you've hit on some really fun concepts. So when do we hit the tipping point of disruption? If I can paraphrase, I think that's what you're really asking. If we're targeting these high-end consumers, isn't it just targeting a different segment, someone who cares about less bells and whistles and who wants a cheaper product? So when does it become disruption? I think the real key is it's disruption when this unexploited opportunity down here with this low end is so sizable that in terms of revenue, in terms of market share, in terms of the whole face of the industry and the business model, that it upends Gillette. So Gillette is seeing the start of disruption. They haven't really been upended yet. They still make a lot more every year than Dollar Shave Club. But I think to answer your question, when does it become not just targeting a different segment, but disruption? It's when you change the face of the industry. It's when you knock off the incumbent. And that becomes just a question of scale and size, and whether or not your business model or what you've done to innovate is sufficiently different that they're seeing it as a whole new way of doing business in this industry. So Dollar Shave Club is a good one. The other ones that were being discussed in forums, when we went from, say, a Blockbuster, some of you younger people are like, what's Blockbuster? Well, we used to leave our house sometimes, and sometimes we used to go rent DVDs. They're like adorable relics that you can find in libraries if you don't know what I'm talking about. And that business model was disrupted with, Netflix, which was a subscription streaming service. They had fewer options, and the options that they do have are turned over every so often at their own discretion. You can't really decide what you get and what you don't get. It's just whatever they offer. And that low-end disruption really tipped the balance when you started to see them displace the incumbent. So that's the real linchpin, is when do we flip the whole market? When do we start to define the market a whole new way? The next question kind of pairs with this one. So no, I'd listen to the next answer to see whether or not it helps you understand disruption. So the next question is a paired question. They're asking, and this is Mantian, about 12 days ago asking, I'm still a bit confused about new market disruption. Are there any other representative examples? So new market disruption, if low end was targeting unexploited opportunities, new market were people who had never actually used your product before. So all those guys who were using shavers, and women, the Dollar Shave Club was actually started offering to women, they'd all used shavers before. This wasn't something new. New market disruption was when, the example we gave in the videos was when the Ford Model T came out and people were moving away from horses to cars. They'd never been in a car before. So that was the example. And you're asking for more. Let's go through a few. Jamie, have you been to Cirque du Soleil?
Yes.
Did you love it?
Yes.
Had you been to a circus before?
Yes.
With animals?
Yes.
Yeah. So those were many yeses. I'm going to explain why I asked that series of questions. They were all leading questions because I'm getting to where I want to go now. So thanks for playing along. Cirque du Soleil is a really good example of new market disruption. So unlike the Jamies of the world who have been to both an animal circus and Cirque du Soleil, there's actually not that much crossover. Most people who are going to animal circuses, so Ringling Brothers, which closed down, boo-hoo, after so many years, in North America, that was our biggest animal circus. They tended to attract families or kids, and they had clowns, and it was not a very sophisticated experience. It was fun for the whole family. Now, those same people are not the same people who are going to Cirque du Soleil. They would never partake in necessarily that experience. But more importantly, what Cirque du Soleil did was they realized, hey, there's this whole market of people who are taking clients to hockey games, who are taking clients to theater, or taking clients to all sorts of business development things that are sophisticated, and there's this whole market of adults. What are we doing in terms of circuses for them? And there wasn't anything. So those people, if we're using the Model T example, those people were driving horses. Those people were riding horses. Those people had one form of consumerism, which was, let's do things that are sophisticated that would be appropriate for client development. And then Cirque du Soleil came along and gave them, for those of you that are unfamiliar, there's no animals, there's really high production value, and it's acrobatics and feats of the human body. It was started in Montreal, and they tour the world. They have standing shows in Vegas, and it's a huge phenomenon. So what they did was they took these consumers who would never have set foot necessarily with their clients or on very expensive dates in an animal circus, and they gave them a whole new product, a whole new market, one that had never been there before. New market disruption. So that's a subtler example. Let's go for even more blatant ones. For those of you watching who are, I think, in our biggest majority, 30 and up, you'll remember the iPod Classic. It was like yay big. It had a big screen, and then there was a click wheel, and then in the middle there was like a little home button. Yeah, some of you are like, I still use this. I still use mine. I think it's fine. But that, my friends, was new market disruption. Before then, how were people listening to music? It was a whole different way of listening to music. You were using not necessarily MP3s. You might still be using CDs. Some people might even be using cassettes. It was a whole different paradigm. Those were not consumers who were listening with this new technology. Then when we got the product, they switched their whole mode of consumption. So that's new market disruption. So far we've done Cirque du Soleil, we've done the classic iPod. I'm being careful to say the classic iPod because there's a new iPod like every year. And now, I mean, largely people use their phones, but that's just iterative or smaller or incremental innovation. When they first disrupted the market, the real kicker is that none of their consumers had used this particular technology before. It's new for them. YouTube. When YouTube first came out, there really was no mass consumption or way to broadcast your own content and then easily consume everyone else's content. So it really democratized this whole idea of video. Before then, what were people doing? It was ad hoc, it was piecemeal. You might be sending stuff to each other, you might be posting it on smaller sites, but this whole idea of collective viewing of each other's content, YouTube. That was new market disruption. The last one that I can speak to, and this is specific to North America, so if you're somewhere else, this might not make a lot of sense, but Curves Gym. In North America, before this ladies only short circuit gym, so a circuit is just the number of exercises you do in a set routine or pattern in a small amount of time. Before that, it was just sort of a free-for-all mix of men, women, with like dumbbells, barbells, free weights, you name it. And there was not necessarily a lot of significantly devoted space to women's exercises and women's exercises that you can do in like 30 minutes or less, women's only. So what did that do? That drew women to the gym who would never have gone to a gym before. And that's the real measure here, is it's a new market. These are consumers who would never have been in this space had it not been for Curves. Where you are, that might not be as relevant an example, but the hallmarks are the same. Have the people that they're targeting ever consumed this type of service before? If it's no, then it's a new market. Do we have time for one more low end?
We had a couple of comments.
Yeah, I love the
market-
comments. Keep them coming.
About market disruption.
Yeah, yeah.
So, let's just see here. So Maddie Bison says the iPod wasn't the first MP3 player on the market. However, it was the first to hit mainstream.
Yeah.
Is this still new
Maddie,
market
what a good question. So Maddie, really good wrinkle. I love the way you think, because that's a key question. They weren't the first. They absolutely weren't the first. There were things like iRiver. Do you remember that? There were other, they looked more like USB sticks with like a little toggle that you could go between. So Maddie, the real kicker is this opened this up, and you use the word mass market, in a mass way. It made it widely available. Same with Ford. If you think back to the Model T, it wasn't the first motorized vehicle, but it was the first one that brought it to the masses. So I think you've hit on something that's a really nice point to add, Maddie. Yes, this is when they first become available widely to a public who had never before had the option of consuming, in this case, music that way or driving a car. It's really good.
Okay, the other one we have is, so it's to do with the Dollar Shave Club and Gillette.
Yeah.
It says from horse wearing people costume. So they are
again. I love horse wearing people costume. Thank you.
They're building the razor that can also make an espresso. But disruption at Gillette is a good thing if you're Dollar Shave Club, ?
Disruption at Gillette is a good thing if you're Dollar Shave Club. One, I really hope they are building a razor that makes espresso. Sarcasm is so difficult to hear on comments, but I really hope that's the case. Like, that would be incredible and hilarious and hazardous if there's really hot beverages around your face. Sorry, and you're asking, I'm gonna paraphrase, so if it's wrong, hopefully they'll clarify. You're asking, is it a good thing to disrupt if you're Dollar Shave Club? I hope I haven't oversimplified, because the answer is a resounding yes. Absolutely. If you are the disruptor, you're changing the business model, you're hopefully bringing in the same type of quality at a lower cost, and you are significantly advantaged because what you're doing has resonance with this whole unexploited market. So what you're doing is getting money out of somewhere where these people had never been paid or been paying money to Gillette. And hopefully, if you're really good at what you do, Gillette can't catch you in time and you're gonna overthrow the whole industry. So absolutely, resounding yes. You're very happy if you're the disruptor. If you're Gillette, you're probably a little nervous, which is why we see them put together a subscription service, which hasn't been that popular.
So if you're actually stealing loyal customers from Gillette, then it's disruption?
Are you stealing loyal customers? No, it's not disruption. So those loyal customers, so Gillette's doing just fine. Gillette's still the incumbent in the industry, so we haven't seen it fully disrupted. But Gillette's customers, the ones who are buying it, the ones who look for the espresso maker, the ones who look for the 7th blade, the ones who look for a personal masseuse to come in every package, those people are not the people who are going to be the subject of the disruption. They're going to keep buying with incremental improvements. It's, as Ano said in one of her questions, or his question, sorry, where it's going to be a different segment. It's going to be the people who are okay with fewer bells and whistles, so not the same loyal customers. The people who are more sensitive to price, who want decent quality, but fewer bells and whistles at a lower cost. Yeah, okay. We've got a couple more. Do we have time? 15
minutes, yeah.
13 minutes. All right, you guys keep the questions coming online, and I'm going to cover off one that I think, I'm going to cover off something from your community TA, which is kind of great. So maybe unbeknownst to some of you, once we see some really rad activity, which is true of most of you, but once we see activity that goes above and beyond, where people are actually interacting with each other and helping the whole network glean insights, we love it, and we promote people to community TAs, and they get to advance on our buck, right? We give them all sorts of incentives. So one of our community TAs, Kathleen Sherry, has done a wonderful job. She says, and this is low-end market disruption, I think subscription services are taking off. So things like Netflix, things like Dollar Shave Club, where you're paying every month for a service. And they're taking off, and they're doing so with low-end market disruption. So she points to Dollar Shave Club, and she says, yeah, they're offering a better price for razor blades, but it also eliminates the pain of physically going to the store and picking some up. Absolutely. Where would we be without Netflix and chill? I mean, is it like walk to Blockbuster and chill? No, absolutely. The ability to stay at home, be more convenient. Additionally, Amazon has offered monthly delivery on items that people tend to buy on a regular basis. They also have Amazon buttons. So if and when you run out of laundry detergent, you can just hit the Tide button specifically, and then it'll order more for you. So I'm with you. So you can get your bottle of multivitamins today for $19.99. If you sign up for a monthly subscription, you get it for slightly cheaper. Okay, so I'm just going to skip ahead because your foundation, your thesis is really neat, Kathleen. The process itself seems kind of like an added feature, but I think it kind of fits the model for low-end market disruption. It's disrupting brick and mortar because people can stay at home and get the products they need. So Kathleen, if I can paraphrase, and I'm trying to read back what you've done, hopefully in representative language, it sounds like you're saying, look, subscription itself is disruption. And I am with you. I think it's interesting. When you look at disruption, it's not just things like innovation or technology, but it's also business model. And you see it with subscription. You also see it with something called multi-sided platforms, for instance. So all types of different business models. I'm just going to explore a few. Multi-sided platforms, which are when you have something like an Etsy, which for those that don't use Etsy, it's where makers of crafts or makers of gizmos or gadgets or makers of anything can go on and sell them directly to buyers on a marketplace. So it's a multi-sided market. They can go on and make money by selling. And then when the buyer comes on and gives revenue, there's some sort of intermediary, Etsy, who takes the cut. So there's 3 players in our market. And that's really disrupted, well, retail generally. You look at Uber with multi-sided markets, where you're bringing in now the driver, you're bringing in Uber who takes a cut, you're bringing in all sorts of different players that have changed the face of that market. So to your point, Kathleen, business models and new ways of either changing your supply chain or changing the way that people buy your product, 100% it is a way to disrupt. Did we have another? You're good? Okay, then I'm gonna take maybe the last one. So this one, oh, this one came from Juju707. These names are wonderful. I hope these are your real names. How about if the company is providing for low incomes, and this is for low-end market disruption, but the prices are still not affordable for some people in the category, and another company comes along and provides it at a cheaper price. So I think you're asking here, Juju707, what if the initial disruptor, so since we've talked a lot about Gillette, let's just keep going. The initial disruptor, Dollar Shave Club, brings you in at like a $15 per month subscription for something amazing. And then someone else can do it for $5 a month. What happens to Dollar Shave Club? I think that's what you're asking. Well, that's when you start to think about, and here I'm starting to blend modules, don't let your heads explode. That's when you start to think about barriers to entry. Like, what does Dollar Shave Club have that would stave off the new entrant? Well, at that point, they probably got a brand name. At that point, they've got switching costs. We are really lazy. We don't like to switch subscriptions. So maybe all of their existing consumers just keep subscribing. They just want their razors to keep coming to their door. So I think it's a nuanced answer. What happens to the new company? What happens to the disruptor? It's going to depend on their dynamics. It's going to depend on how much brand equity they've built up, whether or not there's high or low switching costs, and all of that's going to combine to see how much they are disrupted by the disruptor. So it's a long way of saying all those skills you learned about horizon scanning, you can employ them in a little microcosm to see what might happen to that one company. It's a good question. And I think I might take that as an opportunity. Do I have time?
You have 7 minutes.
7 minutes. I think I might take that as an opportunity to do a bigger wrap up about where this fits in with all of your modules. So hopefully I've answered and given a few more examples to clarify Porter's 5 forces. And where that fits in, you're always going to be doing, and for those with your own businesses, you're always going to be doing horizon scanning or scanning of your industry before you start putting together responsive plans for it, before you start doing your own BMC, before you start coming up with strategy, because you want to know where you're operating. So that was module 3. And then module 4, you always want to be aware of what other people are doing while you're in business, because disruption it's a feature of our times. In terms of how cheap it is to produce things, how cheap it is to do a startup now with so much technology that's available to assist you, there has never been lower barriers to entry in many industries. Not all, but a lot of them are having their barriers lowered. So how this fits in, if this is your own business, you're looking at these as tools to help diagnose what you might want to do before you head into strategy. You're also looking at module 4 as a way to assess where am I in my business cycle and where is my industry? Is it being disrupted? And that takes us into a little bit more, how should I put it, granular or detailed looks within your company with accounting as we head into 5. And then 6, we tie it all together. 6, we show you every single business function and how that's going to combine to make hopefully a fruitful and successful business. So thank you. We'll ask for any last questions. I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we can wait a minute here and just see if anybody else has anything left.
Okay. If you have burning questions, we'll take them. Watch, you're going to save like a really big humdinger right for the last minute. But otherwise, it's a pleasure. I'm having a lot of fun seeing the questions coming out of this course. So many of you are using examples that are so relevant. The companies we're seeing come up again and again and again, if you're curious: Amazon, Uber, and Lyft. FabFitFun was one that was coming up over this past week. Netflix is a favorite. So these companies seem to be really resonant. Each of you has something to say about all of them. And hearing your discussions or seeing your discussions, you're really getting the key concepts around what it is that drives an industry and what it is that can disrupt an industry, which is the whole point of modules 3 and 4. So good work. I think we're good.
Yeah, the only thing we could go back to if we wanted to is horse wearing people costume.
Oh.
I did put,
So prolific, so many thoughts.
yeah, I did put a conversation on hold about the free market. He says, I've asked for this for a long time to a lot of people, and most are of the opinion that there is a free market. And in my opinion, they are deceived. But the funny thing is that the free market needs this deception in order to be successful. Sorry for my grammar, but English is my third language. It's more a way of perception than deception.
Interesting. So we'll leave you with that thought and framing. Horse wearing people costume. I think in general, particularly if you have something as wide ranging as free markets, for people to subscribe to blindly or to agree with a concept wholeheartedly, it sort of requires an unerring belief and a culture without scrutiny. And all of you in this course, especially the ones where I get to see your submissions, you all are critical thinkers who ask really wonderful probing questions. So just to extrapolate from that and use that as a bigger theme, I think none of you in this course would take something at face value without questioning, especially judging from a very fruitful session today. There have been a lot of really good questions, and I would encourage you to keep discussing them. So keep those discussion forums alive. We will monitor them. And other than that, we'll see you at our next office hours.